breaking news in the last half hour. It is an extraordinary move very quickly because this story only broke yesterday. I mean, Sir Keir Starmer, we understand, knew about this conviction. Should we just explain what it is? Because I imagine many people are going, what conviction? Louise Haigh, who, you know? So, Transport Secretary.
So, apparently, some time ago now, she was mugged, and as a part of that procedure, she went to the police and apparently said that her phone was also stolen. It then transpired that that may not have been the case, and therefore charges were brought against her for saying something misleading. Yeah. That ended up, I understand, at the Magistrates' Court, and she did admit she was guilty of it. But it's a spent conviction now, so it has come out.
It's not on her record.
It's not on her record, exactly. So it's obviously come out. We don't know quite where it's come from.
Someone's locked her in.
But it does obviously raise questions around, you know, what she said, how candid she's been. We don't know what she said in the past to Keir Starmer, for that matter, the Labour Party about this, because normally as a candidate, but certainly becoming a shadow minister, you would have to explain anything that might bring the party into
And is that
disrepute.
a formal interview process, or do you have to write it down? What is the process of explaining your past before you're elected?
Well, I mean, you know, back when... in the day, it might have changed since, but, you know, I was asked, is there anything that would bring the party into disrepute, basically? And that was it. You had to say it, and then there was a record if you said something or you didn't. I think at the time I said, you know, I was actually born illegitimately. Is that an issue? But this is like 25 years ago. I mean, yeah, I mean, back in the day, you know, that's the sort of thing I was worried would be made an issue of. But it is a process. And certainly when I first became a minister, my principal private secretary at the Home Office said to me, is there anything we need to know about? Because obviously if you're a Home Office minister, you've got to be, you know, clear about what you have and haven't done.
Yeah,
exactly.
Absolutely. And Salma, I guess it's the word fraud, isn't it, that's just so damning in this instance. I mean, you can't be a Cabinet Secretary, really, can you, if you've got a conviction for fraud, because people already think that politicians are fraudsters anyway. And so it's just the whole look of this. But the speed of the resignation was quite extraordinary as well. I mean, I do wonder whether this is the hand of Keir Starmer being pretty ruthless behind the scenes and saying, sorry, but you're out.
Yeah, perhaps. I mean, a cynic might say that given the record of the government over the last 5 months, it would be helpful for them to have a reshuffle, recharge the government, really move some things around. So it is not unhelpful for the Transport Secretary to create a gap that then means that they can move other pieces around. I do think, though, that it's important that when a story like this comes out, she's put a statement out saying that it was a mistake and she didn't like the advice that she was given by her solicitor to plead guilty. The issue, therefore, is that if it felt defensible, why did she stand down? Or was it the fact that the Prime Minister was no longer willing to back her on the issue?
I mean, his letter to her is very, very brief this morning. It's literally a paragraph. Partly, maybe, because she's only been a minister as a Transport Secretary for 5 months. But he did write at the end, you know, I look forward to working with you again in future. Sort of a bit of a hint that maybe she'll return. I mean, she's very young, Caroline, isn't she? She's the youngest female
I think she's
cabinet
37,
ever.
isn't she? She's, I think she's got a way to go. And, look, I think he's right to do this. And I'm actually think probably for Louise as well, because this story wasn't going to go away.
No.
It's on the front pages today, and it would have run and run and run, and that probably, you know, isn't good for her as well, I think, in terms of dealing with this. But I think he's right. I mean, he did say, coming into government, we're here to serve. And
to clean up.
And to clean up.
You know,
also,
he made a very big play of that, didn't he? And then the issue around all this free suits from Lord Ali and the cost of that and the freebies. That has really played a part in this as well, I imagine, in the overall feeling inside Number 10 about can we take any more?
I think taking action is important, but let's be honest about it. If Labour was in opposition, they would be all over this.
Absolutely. Well, she's called herself for the resignation of several ministers. There are videos going around online, you know, sort of a montage
in opposition,
of all the people that
when she was in
when she was in opposition, calling for the resignation.
It all comes back. It all comes back.
Well, and you've got to abide by the same bar that you set for the government when you were in opposition.
That's politics.
Right?
The one thing that I don't understand about this, though, is that she knew about this, the Prime Minister knew about this, and she was still appointed as the Cabinet Minister. Why is it a problem now if it wasn't a problem then?
I think that will be the next question, won't it?
I'm sure that will be asked.
It's not the crime, it's the cover-up often that really gets politicians, isn't it, right? So it's going to be... Not that I'm saying there's definitely a cover-up here, but you're right, Salma, why has this only come to light now?
But there's also another aspect to it, is that she pleaded guilty. This was something that was not hidden. Are we genuinely saying, yes, people in public life should generally be beyond reproach, but it doesn't mean there isn't a mistake that's happened or, you know, people can reform
look at
or
the
change.
new president-elect of America.
Quite, you know, he's having all his felony charges dropped, so...
Yes, yes.
So I wonder if there's if we're rushing to judgment in this instance. I obviously don't know the details, we don't know what else there is to potentially come out here, but I think it's sort of rich to have known all this stuff and then decide that you're going to push them over the edge.
It all depends on who said what to whom and what they said, doesn't it, though? And we don't know. We don't know.
It's quite interesting. On page 5 of the Times this morning, they've got a picture here saying Louise Haigh was a special constable.
Yes.
Between 2009 and 2011, before becoming an MP, which I suppose adds another element, doesn't it, to...
I mean, being pictured in your uniform.
Yeah, but she's pictured there. It's quite an old photograph there, of course, pictured in a police constable's uniform. Right, well, that is the breaking news of this morning. But, of course, the big story in Parliament for everybody, and indeed for the whole of society, actually. And it's one of those issues that affects every single person. We all think about assisted dying and what it might mean for us if we were to take ill our loved ones. We may have nursed somebody who has been terminally ill. But also, on the other side of the argument, which we're going to hear from today, those who vehemently oppose this bill today on assisted dying, saying it is the thin end of the wedge. For those who are disabled, they feel that this is then going to inevitably be expanded as this is an option for you too if life gets a bit tough. We won't make your life easier, but this is an option for you. And you've been speaking to a great proponent of the Pro campaign.
Yeah, because arguably this whole thing was started by Dame Esther Rantzen when she announced last year that she was going to actually go to Dignitas because she's got terminal cancer and she wants to go to Dignitas and die there peacefully rather than potentially have a painful death
with the support of her children and all of that,
And then we interviewed Sir Keir Starmer in March when I had Dame Esther Rantzen and Sir Keir Starmer on the phone together, and it was then that he promised her he would allow time for a vote, and then the whole thing sort of built a head of steam from there. We got this private members bill. So I caught up with Dame Esther Rantzen yesterday, and this was her final plea to MPs before that vote in just a few hours' time.
Sir Keir said to me that he hoped I would be able to witness the debate, hear the debate, and I never thought that was possible, but I've been lucky enough to have one of these new miracle drugs, and lo and behold, I will be listening, watching, glued to my television, and as I boringly say, with everything crossed, that the vote will go towards a change in this cruel, messy law.
Just remind us, though, why it is that you feel the law should change.
What is happening at the moment is compelling people to have really agonising deaths. And I'm afraid that memory of someone in agony becomes a terribly, terribly tragic memory that overwhelms other happier memories. The legislators need to recognise that the law at the moment is a mess, and it's cruel, and it's not the kind of law that, as a compassionate country, we should have in place.
If the status quo remains, what will that mean for people in your situation, potentially?
I will go to Dignitas in Zurich for an assisted death, which I hope will be quick and kind and merciful and easy. And then I shall come back and haunt the members of Parliament that haven't changed our law yet.
Have you not been persuaded by any of the arguments you've heard about, for example, vulnerable people and the risk that they might be coerced into an assisted death?
I'm very saddened by the fact, for example, that disabled people feel that they'll be in any way involved, because this bill only applies to people who are terminally ill in the last 6 months of their life. It doesn't apply to any disabled people who are not terminally ill in the last 6 months of life. But some of the active campaigners clearly believe that having a disability means that your life isn't valued. And I think that's a terrible reflection on the way they've been treated.
How do the last few months campaigning on assisted dying compare to everything else that you've achieved in your career?
It came out of me disclosing that I've joined Dignitas and will have to fly to Zurich to have an assisted death if this cancer progresses and starts to make my life unbearable. And I don't want my family to have to witness that. I don't want that to be the last memory they have of me. So it's, in a way, more personal than some of my other campaigns. And I shall have my fingers and toes crossed throughout the debate, hoping for a vote which means that future generations will have a far better law than we've had to suffer.
Well, she is, whether you agree with it or not, she is a remarkable woman right to this moment, isn't she, in her predicament. And with a sense of humour as well, you know, that she's come back and haunt the MPs who duck it today.
Yeah, and I think she feels a real sense of pride that she's still here to see the vote happen, actually, because she's been given this terminal diagnosis. She doesn't know how long that she's going to be able to live for. And when we interviewed Keir Starmer in March, you know, she had no idea that she'd still be here in the autumn to see this vote take place. It's a massive, massive day.
And so the pressure is on those undecideds this morning, Caroline and Salma. Salma, what are the... one might assume that if you haven't decided you're for something, then you must necessarily at this point be against it because you haven't quite, you know, got to the threshold where you feel convinced enough. And therefore it makes me feel that, does that mean that most people, when it comes to it today, in a few hours' time, having heard everything, will just go, I'm still not ready, and it won't pass? I mean, what's your sense of it?
So there's two things. One, if you're sort of around Westminster, then the people who are backing the bill and the vote tonight will be saying they think they've got the numbers and they think it's going to pass. We have to remember that this is not the vote that makes it legal. This is the vote that takes it to the next stage, and potentially means that the government will then take the bill themselves rather than it being a private member's bill. It's one of those ideas that's been mooted. I don't know if that's going to happen, but it's one of those ideas. So it's a seminal moment to see if the legislation progresses. So it is not the end story. The second thing that I would say is that I don't think the discussion around this has been that far apart. I'm against the bill, but I see the benefits and the virtues of what's being proposed at the other side. So the reason that makes this so hard, I think, for a lot of people that are undecided, is that it might be just that one thing that tips you over one way or the other.
And I've got to say, having reported on it throughout the year, every time I do a report, I think that is a very persuasive argument, whether it's for or against. It's one of those things that's really difficult, actually, to sometimes reconcile. And let's just have a quick look, actually, at where MPs have fallen down in terms of numbers as we speak. So ITV News have been doing this tracker of MPs who've declared their hand. 205 in the green there are in favour of assisted dying. We've got 159 who are against there in red. The yellow, though, is the undecided, 125 of those. And that's why this is really going to come down to the wire. I should just say that last little category there in grey, they are those who plan to abstain and said they're just going to sit this one out. So it is the 125 undecideds, Caroline, that could swing it, right? And we just don't know which way they're going to go.
Yeah, I think it works two ways on the underside. I think Salma's right. There'll be some people for whom they are, you know, against it and they just want to leave that today. I think for some others the same would apply, those who are for it. And maybe in the, you know, we've had obviously it's been a massive issue being discussed over the last months. And for some MPs, you know, they don't necessarily want to be in the glare of all of that. They want to sit back, think about it, and on the day make their decision. So, look, I think whatever happens, you know, this is a second reading. It's a vote in principle.
You're in favour, aren't you?
I am in favour. You know, the work then begins as it goes through committees. Now, the government can allow more time for that process. The Health and Care Select Committee, who's already actually had sessions on this, could continue to have sessions. And also, don't forget that when something is passed through the House of Commons and House of Lords, because it's got to go through two places, they can still actually have a period in which they say, yes, it is the law, but actually we now need to think about implementation, and they can set a date down the road. Major bits of legislation, when I introduced the smoking ban in public places, it was a year after. It didn't happen straight away. So there is a lot to consider here, and it is difficult, I know. What I would say is on the issue of palliative care, I don't think anybody on the side of those for or against assisted dying do not believe that palliative care is really important. But actually, a form of illegal assisted dying can operate at the same time as improvements to palliative care.
And it's interesting because The Guardian are saying that the MPs are preparing to announce a new independent commission on palliative care, spearheaded by the Labour MP Rachel Maskell, which they're hopeful we'll actually get the backing of the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, who is actually going to vote against today's
well, his intervention's
bill.
been key, of course.
Yes, it has.
In sort of slowing the momentum in favour.
Can I just flag one thing about the digital tax? One of my issues about supporting this is the idea that some people who afford it can go to wherever it's Switzerland
£15,000
to basically get support with assisted dying. One thing about Esther Ranson's really clear. She is living her life to the full at the moment. This is not about her, but she's talking about at a time of her choosing. Apparently, the Isle of Man is already in the process of legalising assisted dying. Jersey are looking at it as well. So we will, whatever happens in the outcome of this, if we don't have a form of legal system in this country for assisted dying, very close neighbours to us will have it, and so it won't go away.
But the last time this vote happened was about 10 years ago.
Yeah.
2015.
So the question, I suppose, for those today will be, if it doesn't pass today, will it be another 10 years before it comes back?
I'd imagine, yeah.
Yeah, possibly, yeah. And we basically kick it out to touch, basically, don't we?
Yeah, well, we'll carry on talking about this through the show. And I know lots of you at home have very strong views on it. We're getting lots and lots. And it's interesting, you know, I'll just bring you on. Scott on X says, personally, I think it's too big for MPs to vote on. Should the people decide a referendum now? I mean, there's been a lot of that, hasn't there? Because there is a sense that there's sort of 60% of the British public are for it. But
beware a referendum. It always divides the country.
And also,
referendums
aren't legally binding.
No, they're
anyway, so it's just that we already know what people think.
And that's
in a way.
Sort of what's the wording on that?
What's the point of a referendum?
Do people know what they might be voting for?
But I think that lies to the fact that they're not sure that their MP will represent them enough, their views enough. So if a constituent, and lots of constituents feel that their MP is against it and they're for it, or the opposite way round, they feel, well, you're not doing the job I want you to do.
And we've had this on abortion, we've had this on gay rights. I mean, it's always, you know, you're not going to please everybody all the time.
I think the difficulty around this debate is that a lot of people, you know, as you would expect, speak from personal experience, and you cannot take the emotion out of it. And I think that in terms of the representation of parliamentarians, I think we do have to look at practicalities and principles in the first instance, because it has to be a blanket law for everybody, and one's personal experience can't be the thing that drives it, because everybody's going to be different.
Shall we move on to other issues? Well, another face on the front of a lot of the papers this morning is BBC presenter Greg Wallace, and the Daily Telegraph's headline, BBC in fresh sex scandal, although that seems a little bit far-fetched considering
it's inappropriate
this is about inappropriate comments,
rather than necessarily inappropriate behaviour.
But I suppose what they're getting at there is that it's another thing for the BBC to deal with a high-profile male presenter. The BBC, do you feel, is it, you know, it feels like it's every week there's a new big name, but is it the fact that they are now very primed to act, whereas perhaps in the past they weren't as swift to act, and now they are sensitive to it and therefore acting quickly?
Yeah, I mean, the problem that you have when you have a case like Hugh Edwards, for example, is that they clearly had some difficulty in managing that process effectively. And so are they jumping the gun in this instance before something has happened? Are they overly sensitive and therefore are making decisions that aren't necessarily fair? You know, those are all the kinds of questions. There has to be something that's a clearer process in the BBC of how to deal with this, as opposed to just reacting to everything that comes out whenever it comes up because they feel a little bit burnt because they didn't handle a situation properly previously. I
mean, there were accusations by 13 people who worked with him across a range of shows over a 17-year period. I should say that the people representing Greg Wallace say that he has done absolutely nothing wrong. But I suppose the BBC had no choice in this instance, right? If it's 13 people, you've got to do something about it. You've got to investigate it at least. Kirsty Walker, Ulrika Johnson, these are high-profile people making these accusations.
Yeah, of course. But what I think is, you know, actually the BBC and other employers need to get a hold of is, in this case, it's another example of where, and, you know, I don't know the substance of all the, obviously, complaints being made. It doesn't seem to be in the same league at all in terms, if that's the right phrase, as Hugh Edwards for a start. But it's been going on for a long time. And you sort of wonder, you know, what is, as an employer, the BBC doing and managers doing when complaints are raised to rein someone in, to say to someone, that's not on, you do not... Whoever it is, whether it's Greg Wallace or anyone else for that matter, it's not on, this is not how you behave in a workplace. So, you know, why is it always that it sort of comes to this point where it seems all the interventions before, if there were any, have been lacking and people feel that they haven't been heard?
Well, I want to talk about immigration as well, because we had these massive figures out yesterday showing a record high in terms of immigration, almost 1 million net migration. That had actually been uprated since the last figures. This is under the Conservative government, but nevertheless, obviously something that Labour's got to grapple with. Whose fault is it? Because Keir Starmer is very, very keen to suggest this is all the fault of the Conservative government. I mean, the language he used yesterday was extraordinary.
Yeah, he said he
accused them of having an open borders policy, essentially.
Off the scale.
Yeah, but, I mean, he doesn't have... I mean...
Because we haven't, across the political divide, we haven't got a grip on some of the issues.
Well, has he got a grip on it, though? What policy has he got that actually resolve this?
Well, hang on a minute. It's not his figures, for a start, and I'm not trying to sort of push that way, because he will have to deal with this, because we have now realised, and I have to say, one of the aspects of all this is the Office of National Statistics completely seems to be off the scale in terms of estimating what the stats are. It seems in this country we don't really know what is going on, and therefore people are voicing off about things and we don't know. What we do know now is actually the number, in terms of net migration, the figures have gone up by 3-4 times, from something like 300,000 to nearly 1 million
Open door
today.
So there's something that in the numbers that are really, really important to understand. Two things. One, students are counted, and there's a big debate about whether students should be counted, and that's about 400,000 people in those numbers, approximately. And secondly, we have had one-off spikes in people coming in because we've had people who are coming in from Afghanistan facing real brutality there. We've had people from conflict zones in terms of Ukraine coming here. We've had people from Hong Kong where their safety isn't guaranteed by the state that operates there. I don't think there's anybody who really thinks that those numbers are not people who we want to look at.
But the biggest bill, however, enormous, isn't it?
But I've just said that, students...
And they're bringing dependents with them, and that's a spike as well.
There's been a change in the policy from the Conservative Party, which I think was not recognised by a lot of people as a good idea, of stopping students bringing dependents. And what that does then, and the net effect of it, is that it impacts our university sector. It impacts people where we're selling brand Britain. Nobody is saying that there isn't something that we need to do in immigration. This is not uniquely a British problem. There is also the same issues that are occurring in Europe, the same issues in America. I mean, you only need to look at Donald Trump and look at that rhetoric. The question here is, Keir Starmer is standing up and saying, you guys had an open border policy. That's just not true.
You won the general election in 2015, and to be honest, the EU referendum and Brexit was all about immigration. You then came in 2019, and what we've seen is the figures have literally rocketed from around 330,000 net migration to nearly 1 million net migration.
Freedom of movement was ended when we Brexited. So that's not a number that is ever calculated in the net migration figures because there was always freedom of movement.
You can see...
you're losing you're losing the skills base, and you're looking at these numbers. So you have to ask yourself, and I've asked myself this a lot of times, is this the right metric to base our immigration policy on?
OK. Well, look, this blame game is going to continue for a while. Yeah, I think Labour are going to keep saying it was the Conservatives, and the Conservatives are going to keep saying it's Labour's problem.